Materials from today's meeting, as well as presentation that we'll be hearing from Peter, will be available on our website later this week or early next week. And so welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you're here for today's California Water Data Consortium's Data for Lunch with Peter Colohan from the Internet of Water Initiative at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy Center for Geospatial Solutions. I'm Tara Moran. I'm CEO of the California Water Data Consortium. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the consortium, we were founded in 2019 to support implementation of the Open and Transparent Water Data Act, sometimes referred to as AB 1755. And since passage of the Open and Transparent Water Data Act, there has been a cascade of open water data efforts at the state and federal level. So this includes states like New Mexico, whose Open and Transparent Water Data Act was closely modeled after California's, to Utah, Texas, Oregon, and beyond. And concurrent with all of that momentum at the state level, the Aspen Institute convened a series of roundtable discussions that culminated in a report entitled Internet of Water, Sharing and Integrating Water Data for Sustainability, and ultimately in the formation of the Internet of Water, a program originally housed at Duke University. And since that time, the Internet of Water has evolved significantly. And we're going to hear today from Peter Colohan, director of the Internet of Water Initiative, on that evolution, as well as the newly formed Internet of Water Coalition. And we're very excited to be using this meeting to announce that the California Water Data Consortium is now an organizational member of that coalition. And so we're going to hear about that, as well as some of the technologies that the Internet of Water is working on. We've also seen significant momentum for open water data at the federal level. So Peter will be talking about some of those initiatives, including a draft bipartisan Federal Water Data Act that passed the US House this past July. And so thank you to all of you for joining today and for being part of building the open water data community in California and beyond. I am joined here today by Lindsay McPhail, Associate Resource Specialist with Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, who also volunteers with the consortium. And she'll be helping me facilitate today's discussion. So before I hand things over to Lindsay to formally introduce Peter, I just want to run through a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, we are always looking for suggestions for additional Data for Lunch topics. If you have suggestions, please reach out to either me or Amanda, and Amanda's going to drop our contact information into the chat. And then just briefly on the flow of today's meeting, after Lindsay introduces our speaker, we'll hand things over to Peter, who will give about a half-hour presentation. After that, we'll have time for questions. Lindsay and I will be moderating those questions, so please go ahead and drop them into the chat. Please include your name and affiliation when you do so. Alternatively, please feel free to raise your hand electronically. We'll be tracking those, and you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question yourself. It's always nice to hear other voices in the room, quote unquote room. And then similar to our last event, our speaker has graciously agreed to stay on after sort of that formal discussion, which will close around 1 o'clock or at 1 o'clock. And Peter's going to stay on for just some informal Q&A. So if you have additional questions or things that you want to share or challenges that you're working on that you think might be relevant, you can come off mute at that time, and we'll have sort of time for some informal discussion. As I mentioned before, slides and a recording of today's presentation will be available on our website after the event. If you're not already part of our listserv, please do subscribe on our website. You'll receive information on when that material is available, as well as other updates and news from the consortium. And so with that, I am going to hand things over to Lindsay.
Thanks. I'm excited to join Tara in welcoming all of you to the consortium's Data for Lunch Brown Bag series. And I'm particularly pleased to introduce Peter Colohan from the Internet of Water. You can find Peter's full bio on the event page, as well as on the consortium's website, which you can reference for more detail. But as a brief bio for our webinar, Peter Colohan is the director of the Internet of Water Initiative at the Lincoln Institute Center for Geospatial Solutions. And Peter came to the Lincoln Institute from Duke University, where he collaborated with a team of experts to create the Internet of Water Startup project from 2018 to 2021. Prior to that, Peter served for 9 years with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, working on federal investments in environmental data, science, and technology, with an emphasis on water and climate issues. So thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to hearing about the newly formed Internet of Water Coalition. So Peter, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, Tara, and thank you for that introduction, Lindsay. It's very nice to be here. So I love California. I love visiting California. Please keep inviting me. I was just there for the California Water Data Summit. And so I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk with you virtually. California is such an important state. And it's often said that as California goes, so goes the nation, right? And I think that's true in water data. California is the first state to have legislation around water data. New Mexico followed thereafter. And the federal government is sort of coming behind. We'll see if they're successful. But and I would say, of course, that there's been a lot of work in the past, and I'll talk about that in my presentation. But I applaud all of you for your work in California on California water data. Please keep doing it. Please keep modernizing. That's what we're all up to together. So I will begin by sharing my screen, and hopefully you guys will be able to see my presentation. And we'll start.
Looks good. Yeah.
Okay. So this is my update for all of you on national efforts to modernize water data. You guys are doing this in California. We're also trying to do it nationwide, which is a really big lift. And I'll tell you about how we're proceeding. So first, a little bit of context. The evolution of modern water data exchange has been going on for some time. So it started really in 2009 with the advent of WaterML, which was a language for sharing, a web language for sharing water data on the internet, like an HTML for water. Then Western States Water Council created the Water Data Exchange. The Water Data Exchange is a program of the Western States Water Council based in Salt Lake City. It's really an effort to share and exchange water rights, water use, and water diversion data among the states. They're still working on it, but the need was identified as far back as 2012. Then the federal government, 2014, the Open Water Data Initiative. This was an initiative of the Obama administration, but really it was a federal agency, civil servant kind of initiative. I was in government when that was happening. And it was really a push to get the US Geological Survey, NOAA, NASA, the Department of Energy, Department of Agriculture, to modernize the way that its data are published at the federal level. And this, of course, Reclamation, Army Corps. And significant progress was made at that moment. More progress has happened since 2014, of course, and there's plenty more to go. All of you have encountered federal data sets that are hard to access or use. And so the federal government still has a lot of work to do, but they've made a lot of progress. Okay, then along comes the Internet of Water. And essentially concurrently, the California Water Data Consortium, I should say, or the California Initiative was born around this exact same time, as Tara was saying. And this really is the moment when this conceptual thing, which was happening sort of in academia in 2009, and then the Western states as a collection, then the federal, now really state level efforts, state level and local level efforts really began in 2018. This really began to get traction, not least because of the efforts of our sponsors and Tara's sponsors, the philanthropic donors who decided that this problem really needed to be solved at the state level. And they stepped up and made donation to do that. So I like to put GeoConnects here, which is this fundamental tool that we are creating for metadata, water data publication on the web that is geospatially referenced, a geospatial index. And that we came up with in 2019. Really, our partners at USGS came up with it, and we are really working to implement that idea. And then the Internet of Water Coalition, as Tara mentioned, that's really the next evolution. from the startup project at Duke, from the Internet of Water its perspective, we've now expanded to a coalition. And so this is that. We have the Aspen report in 2017. We have the startup project in 2018. And now we have the coalition. And the coalition is a group of organizations, nonprofits led by these 5 nonprofits, including Duke, who hold resources from grant-making institutions, both federal and philanthropic, to implement an idea, which we call the Internet of Water, to work on goals. In each one of these organizations has a different function in the Internet of Water, but that's in the steering committee. But then the coalition itself is a wider group. It's imagined to be a wider group of about 25 experts and organizations. And as Tara mentioned, I'm so excited that the California Water Data Consortium is now an organizational member of the Internet of Water Coalition. In fact, the first organizational member that's not on the steering committee. So congratulations again on joining and being the leader, being leaders in this space. Okay, let's see. All right, so I'll tell you a little bit about the Lincoln Institute initiative. This is the initiative I'm in charge of. We act as a service center for the Internet of Water community, supporting the IIW coalition of nonprofits, states, and other organizations. We support the federal agencies, Department of Energy, USGS, and other federal agencies, as well as an emerging roundtable of federal agencies on this question of sharing water data. And we provide, and it's envisioned that we will provide long-term support for GeoConnects, this technology which will be necessary for there to be a national Internet of Water. Okay, so here's the main idea in a cartoon, which is always helpful. I think all of you understand this, but this is what we're all up to. Discoverable, accessible, and usable water data, FAIR data, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. You've heard that acronym. We believe that will lead to new information and insights, which will lead to improved decision-making in the water data community and water community, which will lead to better water management outcomes, which will lead to healthy communities and ecosystems. This is our intention. We don't do data for data's sake. We do it because we want to get to the bottom of the circle here, healthy communities and ecosystems. So it's always important that we maintain our focus on our largest possible mission. And as we handle things like APIs and old CSV files and other things that seem mundane sometimes, but in fact that's these steps that we take at this very fundamental level ultimately improve our communities, and we need to remember that next time you're wrestling with a non-interoperable data set. All right, so the Internet of Water is what? What is the Internet of Water? It's 3 things. It's a philosophy and set of principles. It is a philanthropic project, and it is an emerging federal initiative. So what are the principles? So the first set of principles, these are found on the Internet of Water website, which is still hosted by Duke University. And essentially you can group the Internet of Water principles into 3 groups. The set of why principles. The first is that water data are essential for efficient, equitable, and sustainable and resilient water planning, management, and stewardship. The usefulness of water data, modern data infrastructure increases the usefulness of water data and enables its broadest possible application. Water equity, data equity is necessary for water equity. Modern data infrastructure should be implemented and governed so that data are usable by and for overburdened communities. And the next group of principles is about the how. This is the beating heart of the principles. We want everybody to adopt and observe these principles voluntarily. But all data should be fair. All water data produced for the public good should be by default be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable for public use or authorized users. You can create a ring fence around your data. I don't mind, but make sure it's modern. Make sure it is fair. You may create that ring fence and close it off to certain users, but please make your data modern. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to share even among your users. So open does not necessarily mean public, but open is a prerequisite for public data. Okay, secure. Security and privacy risk associated with sharing data can be mitigated using mechanisms for tiered access for authorized users. as I was just talking about. And then standardized, commonly accepted data, metadata, and exchange standards should be adopted by water data producers to promote interoperability, efficiency, sharing, equity, and secondary uses of data. So again, these 3 principles, 4 to 6, are how we build an Internet of Water. And I encourage all of you, if you can hear my voice and you handle water data, please look at these principles. Please see if you are observing them. If you're not observing them, please send me an email and tell me why you're not, because I want to understand what is keeping people from doing this, because this is the way we get to the modern environment that we're all seeking. Okay, who is doing this? Who has control? Control and responsibility over data are best maintained by data producers. If you are a data producer on this call, I think you'll be glad to hear, you were probably glad to hear me say that. We are not making copies of the data, or at least not all the time. Sometimes you need to. Building a hub sometimes requires making a copy. But as a rule, we want control and responsibility for data to be maintained by data producers. So who determines the quality and use of the data? Data producers are responsible for sharing the data. Data producers are responsible for sharing data of known quality and documenting their essential metadata. It is data users who are responsible for determining whether their data are appropriate for a specific purpose or use. And who holds the data? Everyone. Federated, distributed system of interoperable public water data. Those systems, federated systems, generally provide the scalability and flexibility to meet the diverse needs of data producers and users. And I know you all in California are having discussions about how to build federated systems, and I'm really encouraged by that. So we have three sort of activities in the Internet of Water. We have place-based projects, we have new technologies, and we have a peer-to-peer community of practice. And I'll just start by a little bit with our place-based projects. Here are 3 examples, one in California. These are from the startup phase, where we built 10 separate collaborations around the country. Here are 3 examples. We did a freshwater harmful algal bloom monitoring and notification system in California. Rather, I should say, we helped the state of California, State Water Resource Control Board, enrich their system with tribal data and with community science data. And the purpose of the activity was to build a data ingestion pathway to the system that the state of California was using to enrich it and make that data set more interesting, more valuable to the user community. Second example down below is improved data management and decision support in the lower Pecos Valley in New Mexico. In this example, we are working to improve the accessibility of data about groundwater wells, and how they influence the flow of the Pecos River. And this is important for the irrigation district, because obviously the irrigation manager is trying to manage the surface water. The groundwater wells are having an impact. So having a data system that allows that information to be integrated together, very valuable and powerful for them. In North Carolina, we built a water supply dashboard for utilities, basically to report water supply conditions to the state. And this was a big success, so successful that the state climatologist of North Carolina decided that they would take up the system and maintain it, because it was so valuable and powerful to them to see water supply conditions across these utilities. And essentially it was sort of a reporting tool for utilities. So those are just 3 examples. There are many, many use cases. Don't get Tara started on the use cases. There's 1,000. She's doing many, or the group is doing many, working on many. So, and there's always more. Okay, community standards and community practice, our peer-to-peer network. This is sort of the family of people involved in the Internet of Water, engaged in water data. We have a lot of people from California. I'm very grateful for that. 212 members from 43 states are in our community of practice. And we hope to cultivate a growing of the community of practice through our new IOW coalition. Okay, the federal initiative, this is what we're working on with, and I'll come back to the technology in a moment. We're working actively with the U.S. Geological Survey and the Department of Energy. We're in dialogue with EPA. There are clean water provisions of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which passed in October of 21, which reference Internet of Water principles. That law also authorizes the creation of a water data sharing pilot program, which is not yet appropriated. And then the Draft Water Data Act, which I'm going to go into more detail in a moment about, embodies the Internet of Water principles. Okay. All right, but let me tell you a little bit about the technologies. And this is a few slides on this so that you can understand it. So, and that you can kind of get a feel for this core technology that we're creating, mainly GeoConnects. So, but first, I'll start with geographic and thematic hubs. So in order to organize water data, it's everywhere, right? And so we want people to publish in modern ways against these standards, but also we do need aggregators, folks who bring together thematic groupings of water data around particular themes. So, for example, the Western States Water Council, as I mentioned before, aggregates water use, water rights, and water availability data across the Western states. Kawazi is a repository for sensor data. They're working on any form of water data from sensors and the interoperability of those data. Water Data Collaborative is a hub for community science data sets. The Water Data Collaborative fosters the development of community science and the increase of the capacity of community science groups nationwide. And they also provide the function of a clearinghouse for community science data through their Clean Water Hub. Texas and New Mexico each have their own state hubs. For New Mexico, the New Mexico Water Data Initiative, the Texas Water Data Initiative. And in both cases, they are building a technical hub that actually integrates data across the state. Again, we can come back to whether California will do that or not. It's sort of a bigger lift in California, and you guys, we can talk about it if you want. But and whether it's a good idea or not. But anyway, the bottom line is they're doing it in Texas and New Mexico, and it can be done in lots of places. Okay, I'm going to show you this little video if I can make it work. See if I can make it work. Well, I'm gonna give up on that because maybe I'll figure that out at the end. But this is I'll come back to this video if I can make it happen. So I'll just talk about GeoConnects and what it is. So GeoConnects, in 2019, we came up with this idea, which we call GeoConnects, and it's based on earlier research done at the Geological Survey on the premise that if I'm a user, I should not have to know, I should not have to have a priori knowledge of any portal or any website or even any agency that's holding water data. I should simply be able to search for it on the internet. That's the premise. So before, if you were to search on the internet today for water data, you will get a few relevant data sources. So if I search on the Potomac River, which is the principal waterway of the DC area, I will get information about, first I'll get a USGS stream gauge because that's nicely published in a modern format. Then I might get information about Great Falls, which is the sort of nearest sort of lock and dam structure that's part of the Potomac River system. Then I might get information about a hot dog stand or a park, but I won't get a lot of water data about the Potomac. What I will get is a few well-published data sets and then lots of other kind of random information about recreation on the Potomac, basically. So after GeoConnects, we want online search to reveal all relevant sources of data. So I should be able to say, give me all the water data, all the data about the Potomac River from point A to point B, and I should get every piece of data from the Army Corps of Engineers, from EPA, from USGS, from the state of Virginia, from the state of Maryland, from the Potomac River Basin Commission, you name it. I want all the data so that I can decide what I'm doing with it. And that's what the concept of GeoConnects will allow if it is fully funded and comes into being into the world. All right. Next slide. So when we are fully funded, which is about this will probably take about 8 years, I think, from the time we started, let's say 10 years, so 2028, maybe 2030 is when maybe I hope will be done and this will be possible. What will be possible? So GeoConnect users and modelers can discover machine-readable data sets of potential interest, including stream flow, water quality data, water use rights and diversions, locations and attributes of engineered features, precip and atmospheric deposition, groundwater and aquifer data, different versions of hydrography data sets and their references to each other for interoperability. Impaired waters, designated wetlands, other hydrologic features derived from regulatory processes, other data sets of interest, wetlands, reservoir flow, outflow data, etc. Here I've got this slide again. So, all right, so with that, what I'm trying to get you to see is the richness that would be available to all of you as users of data if this technology and system were to come into existence. Okay, sorry that duplicate. That's why my slides are off, because I duplicated my federal initiative slide. Okay, so let me go back. So the federal initiatives, again, we're cooperating with the agencies. We're working with the provisions of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, which passed in October. And then we have this new draft Water Data Act, which passed the House in July of 2022 as Title VI of HR 5118. Okay, so what does this Water Data Act do? It does three things. It creates a national water data framework. It has stakeholder engagement and interagency provisions, and it has a grant program and new authorizations for funding. So the National Water Data Framework, this is going to sound familiar. It prioritizes key data and technology. It adopts common standards, or it asks the agencies to do this. It asks the agencies to ensure fair data. And the person responsible, by the way, in the legislation is the Secretary of Interior. So it's Interior, which controls Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Geological Survey, Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management. Those are all the agencies under Interior. I haven't listed them all, but in Bureau of Indian Affairs, many others, about seven agencies inside of Interior. The Secretary of Interior is responsible for this. So key water data and technology, common standards, fair data, common approaches to data integration, a common national geospatial index, which is essentially a reference to the work that we are doing, harmonizing policies and programs, coordinating activities across agencies, and supporting technology adoption. So this is, in my mind, the heart of the Water Data Act. I am very hopeful that it becomes law because of this section. And I think it would be very valuable for the world if the USGS can establish a national water data framework. Otherwise, it will remain a voluntary activity that the Internet of Water will continue to support. But we would love this boost from the federal level. It also includes interagency and stakeholder engagement provisions. It creates a water data council, and it establishes an advisory committee on water information as a federal advisory committee. It revives ACWI. Some of you have been around the block for a while, might remember the old ACWI, and it revives it. I believe that these are good provisions, although I think I'll say publicly that I have some reservation about them because they can be a little heavy from a bureaucratic management point of view. But that said, I think stakeholder engagement is vital. And I think interagency dialogue is vital. And I think these two provisions try to address those things. The grant program that's authorized in the bill creates a new grant program for states, tribes, and local agencies and other entities to advance water data exchange. It authorizes $25 million annually for the grant program, meaning states, tribes, others can apply. Each year, there'll be a pot of money, $25 million, to apply for grants for improving and modernizing water data. And it authorizes $15 million for the implementation of the remainder of the act, meaning the framework for the federal agencies, the water data framework, also the FACA and the interagency provisions. So this bill has teeth because it has money in it. And that is an exciting thing if it becomes law and gets appropriated, which are still, those two things are coming down the line. The status of the bill, or we'll see whether they're coming down the line. They're not yet true. So the bill has passed the House. The next thing that's going to happen is the Senate would have to pass it, or the language of the bill would have to be incorporated into another bill, like the federal appropriation for 23 or something else. But it is unlikely that this bill would be appropriated in 23. It might get authorized. The hope is to have all this authorized, then it might get appropriated in 24. Or it might not happen at all, because we never know what happens in DC. It's quite the place these days. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation. This is me, Peter Colohan, the chair of the Internet of Water Coalition. It is my absolute pleasure to tell you all about all this stuff, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you so much, Peter. A lot of great information, a lot of exciting things, both that have already happened, but on the horizon as well. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that.
Sorry about my one duplicate slide. That I did mistake. But I got to tell you twice.
I think you're the only one who noticed. So.
Okay, good.
So I would encourage everyone to drop any questions that you have into chat. Lindsay and I will be tracking those. Also, feel free to raise your hand, as we mentioned earlier. We'll be moderating that. Peter, I had a question around as you're building out the GeoConnects, which I think is just such a powerful tool moving forward. How do you propose dealing with differences in data quality, and ultimately, how do we ensure that we're conveying differences in both data quality as well as uncertainty associated as we're pulling data across these different sources and looking to ultimately make linkages? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So as the Internet of Water principles articulate, data quality, data producers are responsible for publishing data of known quality. So, and what the GeoConnect system does, it does not carry any data. It is metadata that takes you to the original source. So you arrive through GeoConnects to the original producer. So then it is up to the producer to have said that this is to have articulated the quality of the data and have done the QA/QC at the producer level. The mistake that has been made in the past is in efforts to try to aggregate, always stumble on this problem of QA/QC. It has to happen as close to the producer of the data as possible, and then we point to it. And then the producer has to say, this is data of known quality. Here is the quality of this data. And that's part of the trick of the work, is getting each producer to play ball in the same way. And that's why I really appreciate, for example, the Water Data Collaborative with the community scientists. They have an entire framework for improving the QA/QC of the community science data sets that are collected by those organizations. And when you go to the Clean Water Data Hub, you will find community science data sets that are quality controlled. So that is, to me, it's very important that we build a community that understands the importance of QA/QC as a standard, sort of as a way of doing business, and publishing metadata that speaks to that, so that the user can then take it at face value. There's always going to be people who misuse data on the user side. Like, in some ways we can't really stop that, but our job is to make sure that the data that comes out is authoritative and QA quality control. And I think everybody who's participating understands or should understand, and we sort of promote that.
Thanks so much, Peter.
Peter, this is Lindsay. Thanks again for such a great presentation. I kind of have a more general or broad question. I'm curious, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges in creating a federated water data system, and how is the Internet of Water specifically addressing some of those challenges?
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Wonderful question. The biggest challenge is anxiety about sharing data. This is the fundamental social behavioral change that has to take place. And there is a related challenge, which is the absence of incentives to modernize. So if you are inside of an agency, many of you are, maybe, you will know that there are many pressures, there are few resources, no love, no respect. There's all this kind of Rodney Dangerfield quality to the work that we do. And so when asked, you approach a person who is under those pressures, hey, will you share your data? Well, first of all, I'm not allowed to. Second of all, I have no money. No one's helping me. What do you mean? Go jump in a lake. That's kind of the answer you get. Right? So what we are trying to do is build incentives, both in terms of community collaboration, money, and like sort of making it easy, free technology. Here's new free technology to help you get through this. And here's a community that is also trying to do it. And oh, by the way, we're going to also try to find some money. And that is our way, we think, of overcome. And we also we're working at Duke, the Duke team is working on technology adoption, social behavioral change research, what steps. And a lot of times it's, procurement. You might have to change your procurement procedure in your agency, or you might need a policy to change. So there's policy and other work that has to happen to overcome these barriers. But I'd say the two barriers are the unwillingness to share and then the kind of disincentives to modernization. On the unwillingness to share in California, you guys have solved it with the law. Oh, boom, share, thou shalt. And that is extremely helpful. In other places, we don't have that law. So it's a lot of hands on hips, a lot of folded arms. I'm not sharing, right? And one of the reasons people don't share is privacy and security. They often bring that up. Oh, privacy and security, privacy and security. Okay, those are often red herrings. They are not real reasons. They are, I'm afraid, so I'm going to tell you that I can't share because of privacy and security reasons. Because what I can tell you is that if you modernize your data, it will be more private and more secure. And so don't tell me about your privacy. Well, that's my kind of background, my hands on hips. But then when I'm being my true self, I'm like, okay, I know you're concerned. Like, so you have to calm down the fear. You have to bring the fear down by introducing how the technology will help with privacy and security. But the background understanding we all need to share is that those are often red herrings.
Thanks for that. As an employee at a water supplier, I definitely understand the fear of sharing data for the fear of it being misused or misconstrued. But I'm looking forward to breaking down some of those barriers. We are getting some questions in the chat. First, we have a question from Angelina Cook, and I wanted to give her the opportunity to either ask her question or we can read it. So Angelina, are you still on with us?
Sure. Hi, I'm here.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hey.
I was just wanting to know more about the Water Data Act as far as the timeline and if there's any opposition in Congress to it.
Yeah. So the timeline is right now, we're in sausage making period of September to December, which is a sort of mysterious period where it's very difficult to track what's going on. If you spend any time with the Congress, especially in an election year, so we have the law out of the House and into the Senate. So now it's a little bit of a black box at the moment, but what will probably happen is stuff will start falling out of the Senate like in September and then also in December. That's when you'll see things emerging, November, December, because the place kind of goes dark for the election, October, November, right? So I would say we will see something either in September, just less likely, more likely December, or maybe even January, but before this Congress ends. This Congress will end and the new Congress will be seated in January. So we'll see what happens this fall, and then it'll go through or it won't, and then that's where we'll be. So that's my answer on the timeline.
Okay. And then, I am curious about specific opposition.
Oh, opposition, yeah.
And I did also want to just mention to clarify about California water shareability. We might have laws for it, but we also have proprietary laws that do hide a lot of important data from the public.
Yeah, and this is a multi-layered problem, right? So what I often tell people is that we, the Internet of Water, we're chiefly concerned with modernization, because this tiny little nonprofit cannot possibly correct all the data policy problems. But what we do is try to advance the data sharing policy, data transparency. We're part of that movement. But our role and function is to modernize the data, because that is a priori condition. Should sharing be allowed, you want it in a modern way. And it also can act as a stimulant to sharing. But yes, there are many, many, many concerns, and proprietary data is a whole nother realm that we are not yet attempting to tackle. We are focused on public data. It's a bigger fish to fry, so to speak.
Okay, thank you. That's actually a very fair answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And then just the opposition to
the opposition. So a little bit of some opposition in the House appeared a little bit. Democrats are going to weaponize data to hurt farmers. Environmentalists are going to hurt farmers by weaponizing data. That was the quote that I heard. I was deeply unhappy about that because I think that's a grossly unfair characterization of what's happening. One congressman said that. I don't think that that's real opposition. I don't think it reflects any real opposition. I think it was in a litany of complaints about a whole set of bills. There's kind of some opposition to the overall package that the Water Data Act is sitting in now. I don't know all the details of that, but the the Drought and Wildfire Recovery Act has many problems apparently for lots of people, both left and right. So there may be some challenges with the current legislative vehicle, is what I'll say. I might be wrong about that. There's so much going on the Hill, I can never really know. But what I've heard is that there are some issues there. So what I think might happen is the legislation, the language might get decoupled from that bill, maybe, but maybe it'll stay. Who knows? I don't really know. At this point, I'm guessing. So.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Angelina, for such a great question. Really good to hear sort of what's going on, what we can anticipate, and Peter's take on how it might all play out. So we have quite a few questions coming in. Carly, do you want to ask your question, or would you prefer if I read that?
Sure, I can do that. Yeah, my question is, do you envision any sort of auditing process for participants or the data providers for evaluating whether you'll continue to include them if for some reason they're unable to maintain the standards of like the FAIR data, or some portion of their involvement falls off?
Yeah, I think the nature of GeoConnects is such that you have to have FAIR data to be in GeoConnects. It's a sort of it's a digital function, because what we intend to do is automate. We're not like a beehive, like we're all scraping data websites. This is going to be an automated system that is crawling. And so by definition, if you have published your metadata and you've made your stuff findable, then the crawler will find it. If you haven't done it, it won't find it. So it's sort of like you have to modernize so that GeoConnects can find you, right? And we hope, or not more than hope, by establishing the standard to be discovered by GeoConnects, then all these other QA/QC other things come in. And I'm gonna check with my guys before I overstate the QA/QC thing. I need to make sure that and I'm actually going to take that as feedback, because I want to make sure that I'm going to see about what are the ways that we can. It's a little bit hard to ensure QA/QC from a discovery point of view, right? I can't really make that happen. It's kind of more incumbent on the provider. So will I kick somebody out if they start to degrade? I don't know that we'll be able to do that, because it's an automated system. But in some ways, we're going to iterate on this, and we'll see how this goes, right? And I like in everything, you'll find kind of potholes here and there in the system, almost surely. But my main view is that you have to keep your data fair in order to get it discovered by the system. The QA/QC question is a little bit harder, I would say.
Yeah, thanks for that. Appreciate it. It sounds like a parallel to kind of search engine optimization.
It is very, very similar to that. We are actually building a search engine underneath Google and Bing, and then ultimately we want Google and Bing to find GeoConnect. So we have to do those steps. But yes, it is very similar to that.
Thanks.
So on the theme of QA/QC, I see another question in the chat from Jake Pasner, and I wanted to ask if Jake wants to read his question, or I'm happy to read it for.
Happy
Go
to
ahead,
jump
Jake.
on and talk about this. This is really interesting. Thank you, Peter, for sharing this this information. It's good to see so many people thinking about these things. So I'm on a team that's working on a lot of these data ideas at the State Water Resources Control Board. We're at the Division of Water Rights, and thinking about how do you get leadership, people that have control of this budget, to understand the significance of why this data is valuable. So advocacy materials, those kinds of things that help leaders understand why having data of a certain quality becomes critical. So accessibility is kind of this framework that you've just gone through of, once it is out there, you'll find it, you'll get it. But getting it to that point where it's been through this QC process seems to be both a very labor intensive process, and also one that's difficult to wrap your head around from a lot of leadership perspectives. Are there materials that exist out there that David Bradshaw? Yeah, thanks. I think that there's materials that exist, kind of generally about data quality being important. Is there a library that's been created kind of for advocating for these ideas, trying to find a place, even where if we were, we had a material that we found that was interesting, that they could be consolidated, because I think that a lot of people are going to be going through that process with their organization.
Yeah, that is a great question, Jake. I do not think that there is such a library. And it's a great idea. We should maybe talk about figuring out how to do it. There is a library, or the Water Data Collaborative, which is the community science group I was mentioning. I'm just zooming through to find. They have a methodology or a framework that helps people get to higher quality data. But in terms of your point about advocacy materials helping explain to sort of higher ups the value of these things, no, I would say that like what is on the Internet of Water website, we have a number of data stories that tell the tale. That could in some ways be a jumping off point for, like, if you haven't, I mean, the Internet of Water website is a lot on there, right? Speaking of portals that have a ton of info that maybe people don't know about. But yeah, I would actually go there. In fact, I've had members of Congress, or not members, but their staff say, "Ooh, I love this data story you have." I'm like, I didn't even know it was there, right? There's like 35 or 40 data stories on the IOW website. So that storytelling is, I think, kind of what you're getting at. And I think we need to do more of that. I'd love Tara, your group, to think about that too, like how you can build story maps and things out of the work. From the use case work is really what tells the tale. The decision makers have an aha moment when the Clear Lake tribe, for example, they have to enter Clear Lake. That's part of their ceremonial ritual. Nobody thinks about that when they're thinking about a freshwater harmful algal bloom monitoring system. But then imagine when you're first told that, it's so moving to me. Like, I mean, and you can immediately see the power of fixing this problem, or trying to fix this problem. And then, sorry, it involves a boring API, but guess what? Like, that's what we're after. We're trying to get to a place where the tribe can communicate, has the capacity. The state is supporting the tribe in its efforts, in that cultural use of that resource. Like, that's the kind of story that needs to be told so people can hear it, and it changes people's minds about this stuff.
Such a great question. And oh, sorry, go ahead, Jake.
Oh no, I was just going to say the same thing. I mean, would love to help support, producing those materials, because these things, getting that story down, just totally love the way you say that, Peter. And sorry for interrupting, Tara.
No, not at all. The power of storytelling, I think, is something that has been underutilized to this point in time. And I think, to Peter's point at the very beginning of his presentation, all of this is ultimately about really getting to healthy communities, healthy ecosystems. And so telling that story, I think, is such a critical element that we should all be tapping into.
Yeah.
I do want to hand things over to Nick Santos. Has raised a couple of questions. And so, Nick, would you be comfortable coming on? If not, happy to read them.
Sure. Yeah, I can come on. You got to remember what I was asking, but I think you actually addressed one of them earlier. One of them was about if GeoConnects involved a curation step, even just curating the providers, or if it was really about machine findable metadata being crawled on the internet. And so I think you addressed that.
Yeah.
But then the other question I had is if GeoConnects is
Funding.
Yeah, is entirely waiting for funding, or if you're building out some smaller part of it and waiting for full build out for additional funding.
Right. So I'll just add a little more on the curation step. So we do, we encourage all data producers to curate their data in a modern way. And then we give them the tool for publishing their metadata, and you can do it, or my team can do it. So, but the bottom line is, we want, there's this kind of step that has to be taken, and then it's done. Because if you curate your data well, and then it's automated in GeoConnect, you don't have to do it again. As long as that's the whole idea. We want to stop everybody from curating and recurating and recurating and curate once, discover always, through automated processes. That's kind of our vision. So there is a curation step, but I can't quite make you do it. Like you can put badly curated data in GeoConnect, I think. I mean, like, it's in theory, but in practice, that probably won't happen, right? Because there'll be this iterative process for building the discovery tool. And these are really good questions. I love doing these presentations because people ask me hard questions like QA/QC and the curation. I'm going to go back to talk to my developers about what happens there and if we can fix that or improve it. On the funding, yeah. So we, like all nonprofits, we run towards a cliff and hope someone will build us a bridge. So we are funded sort of through the next phase of development of GeoConnects, which is essentially the end of 23, sort of. And that is where we will have a prototype where the whole thing will be built. It'll be tested by a bunch of users. In fact, I'm going to invite people soon into user testing moments. Then we'll have a thing. And like, we have a proof of concept. Now we have a prototype. Stage 1 was the proof of concept. Now we're at prototype. We intend to complete the prototype by September of 23 or so. And then we have to scale it. And the scaling and validate and scale is the next step for us. And we do need to find funding for that. And we need folks to sort of be, and it could be that the federal government will pick that up and help us do that. But it also could be that it'll be sort of cooked along as a prototype, being tested in more and more environments, and that might be its fate in the near term. It really just depends on who comes to the table. And so, yeah, so it's an interesting moment. We're not saying that this is I would never be, I don't want to characterize this technology as the answer, right? It is an accelerator for discovering data. The answer is sort of everybody modernizes. So I'm hoping to accelerate that by accelerating discovery with this particular tool. And we also have other tools that help you curate, but basically, yeah, that's where we are. And that we hope that this construction of this discovery tool and this, most importantly, this way of geospatially publishing data on the web will be seen as valuable. And fortunately, we were in New Mexico. We were already in New Mexico working with some of their folks. So there's a whole new group of people were brought together recently in a stakeholder engagement. And one of them said, what we need is a way to publish the data and geospatially reference it. And they said that without knowing about GeoConnects. So it made me really happy. So I think there is an inherent wisdom in this project, I think. And I hope whether this technology or some other form of it takes, comes into being. That's my hope. So.
Thanks. And yeah, just echoing that, I think we've shared a similar vision because the re-enrolling of data portals leads to stale copies of data, leads to additional work, leads to not always finding the most current copy, on and on and on. And it's really felt like a problem of search. And part of me has wondered, why hasn't this been solved by somebody dealing with it with search so far? And then do we need to build it ourselves? I'm glad you're building it. And then
we're trying, and we hope that you guys will. Like, one of the things I hope is to, and I've been talking to Tara about this, like, we'd love to kind of do more work with GeoConnects in California, like have you guys use the system more and see what happens and publish data to it again, because it's super, like, right now it's super prototypey, like not a lot of people know about it. And so, like, there's a kind of there's only a small community of people in the United States, I would say not more than 300 or 400 people who would ever publish to this, would know what to do, like, or would have data to publish to this system as the primary users of GeoConnect. Then you have all the secondary users, much larger group, who are people who are coming to the system to get data. That's still being developed, right? I mean, because to go through like with a machine or with your eyeballs to get the data. And then you have kind of the general audience, that's still yet another group. But really the core question is this going to work for data producers? Because if it doesn't, then we're really pursuing a fool's errand. But I think it will, and I think the community of data producers is small enough that we can actually get traction with them, then we'll have something to offer. And that's kind of the organizational insight that we had, was if we can get this small group of users to do this, this could actually change the world if we're lucky.
Thank you, Nick. Really, really great questions and discussion, Peter. Thank you both. Next question in the chat is from Leif Noble. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. His question is about utility billing data and sharing that data. I'm happy to read it, or if you are on the line and would like to read it, please feel free to come off mute.
Sure, yeah. So I work with HydroPoint Data Systems, and we make water efficiency technology and leak detection technology. And so our business is really identifying the opportunities for savings on those. And so we gather a lot of data to help prove that out to our customers. We work with a lot of utility billing services. And so I was just curious, sometimes it's really hard to get the customer to agree to provide access to that data. And I'm wondering, these guys are aggregating tons and tons of data for commercial customers typically. And just curious about your efforts working with them to kind of open the walled garden to their data and anonymizing it, or how might work.
Yeah, Leif, that's a huge question. We have in concept the idea of a utility hub. Okay, so, and whether or not, and I was talking with some folks about this when I was in California, whether or not that's a good idea, I'm not 100% sure whether there's a national utility hub. But one possibility, that one reason you might have a national utility hub is to share two data sets, public water boundary systems and rates. If those two pieces of information could simply be available to everybody, no matter where you were, a lot could be done. That would save a lot of people a lot of time. And both of those pieces of information are effectively public, but not in all cases, right? And there are some barriers to that. So Leif, you've put your finger on kind of the hardest part of, it's like the last mile of the internet part. So my first effort is around federal and state data. Like, let's get all of that. And then, okay, utility data. Like, so this is a much larger universe. And there are ways, again, like I said, I think where we would focus on a couple of high-level data sets at the national scale, but then at state levels, what you guys want to think about is how can we help with more automated reporting so that the state can have more data and make that data public. And then, as you said, because you're talking a lot about customer data there, specifically billing, right? That might be a bridge too far for a lot of people because of the PII. That's going to be really hard. That's a genuine privacy and security issue. Right. But there are ways around it with masking and other things. And there is some really interesting work being done in Arizona on this subject. So there are ways, I think there are pathways to that, but I think it's further off, but it's a great question.
Yeah, I think also just one thing to consider is the Energy Star portfolio manager.
Yeah.
So, the database already working for ESG reporting and kind of a seemingly growing amount of customers using that as a way to share their data.
Yeah, it's a great model. That is a great model if we can. And the challenge is that, energy data is very well organized and well curated.
Right.
And all the water data that you might put in a water star system is
it's still the Wild West. Yeah, that's what we call it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I'm going to jump in here, and I am not going to jump in for very long because I don't want to stifle the fantastic conversation that's going on. But I am going to say thank you to everyone who's been here. Thank you to Peter. This is sort of the close of our more formal portion of our Data for Lunch. As I mentioned earlier, though, Peter's has agreed to stay on as late as 1:30, and so. At this point, we're going to transition to that sort of less formal discussion period. Would encourage everyone to come off of mute and really that we can have a discussion together. We do still have a couple of outstanding questions. And so, Kemir, I'm not sure if you're still on here. If you are, I'd love to hand it over to you to ask your question.
Yeah. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Peter. Great presentation. I learned more every time I listen to you. The question I had, and you kind of touched on it in response to an earlier question, is that, you know very well that our data is as siloed as our institutions.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to kind of talk about is, what do you see, or how do you see the Internet of Water doing to help overcome this social aspect of data, and how do you see the Federal Water Data Act helping in that regard?
Right. So I'm all for more parties and card games with everybody in the community. This is what I think will get us there. But all kidding aside, I think it is about community building. And it's about providing incentives and grants, and it's about kind of creating it's about doing technology adoption that begins with social and behavioral change. So we would like to see a technical assistance program in which folks arrive at a state and don't immediately start talking about APIs, but immediately start talking about what are your institutional barriers to sharing? Why can't you share? Why can't you modernize? What's holding you back? That kind of question. Do you have enough human resource? Do you lack data science? Is that the problem? Or do you simply despise your colleagues? Is that the problem? Like what is the problem that is keeping you from sharing your data with your colleague? Like what's the barrier? What exactly is the barrier? Now, sometimes the institutional silo is so heavy that you have to kind of do an end run around it if you can't like get higher level people involved, or you kind of work from a bottom up way to kind of dig the information out of the silo and publish it. Like I was joking the other day, it's like, I'm just going to stick a little, imagine a little, fidget spinner on the wall of your agency, and it's going to extract the data. So there are ways to sort of, you sometimes can't overcome it, but I think kind of tackling that social problem directly head on through, and in the coalition, my thinking about it is, I want the coalition to exist, and I want the IOW community of practice to exist so that more conversations like this happen. So one of the things that I really like about Tara's work in the CWDC is the collaborative community way in which you all are proceeding. I think it is a model, because the more you talk, the more you share, the more you exchange, you sort of it starts to become the way of doing business and not the old way. So I think it's about building community, providing incentives. That's what I would say.
Yeah, just to add in, I like the way you frame that we need technologies around the social dimension, because my observation has been, even in today's Q&A, we tend to jump to the data technology, the IT part of the data, and we kind of gloss over the elephant in the room, is that our institutions, our behavior is what's bigger barriers. And so I guess my thing would be, we need to attract more social scientists into our conversations, because they likely have the strategies and the knowledge that water managers or data specialists, scientists don't.
Yeah, I agree fully. Kind of more conflict management in the data space. Conflict resolution, peace and conflict.
I also like that approach, Kamira. Thanks for your question and comments. Glenn Lowe has a next question in the chat. So I see Glenn. Glenn, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure, and I see Peter direct messaged me an answer, which is great.
Okay.
Thanks, Peter. Great presentation. And I'm so excited about GeoConnects because people have been talking about search for many, many, many years. I think that the issue is we're trying to reduce the transaction cost of finding the most valuable data, right? That's, as an economics point of view, that's what we're trying to do. It's kind of find great data faster. Mm-hmm. But as we've seen in a lot of search and social media, the algorithm, if you will, of how things get indexed and ranked is pretty contentious.
Yeah.
Right. So I just, as I know you're getting started and searching for funding stuff, how are you guys at least perhaps thinking about that? And would that one day be included in how you actually do the search functionality?
Yeah. Okay. So great question, Glenn. My kind of default answer to your question is we privilege no data set, that there's no ranking. But that is probably not always going to be true. And Glenn, I remember maybe some of our earliest conversations when I first visited you in California. Like the beast is it's so big, right? It's a big beast, right? So when we get there, what I would say, and I really haven't given this much thought, but so a quick off the cuff answer is I would like some sort of community-based approach for figuring that out, right? And I think also that enormous value can be generated from, let's call it a top 10 list. Like if there's a certain top 10 water data sets that if everybody had all the stream flow, for example, or if everybody had, and we could make that list together, right? And then then you might prioritize those. Like, so that is among the harder questions that has to be asked for any such system like this. And there has to be a process for creating the answer that is a reasonable process. And then we have to just let it live in the world and see what happens. And then we have to kind of then fix it, right? Because it won't be till it lives in the world and people discover that something is systematically being excluded or something is overrepresented that that we'll discover why that's true, right? So, and you know, search engine optimization and that world, it's not perfect. Like it is, people tend to think it's some sort of magical thing. No, and you like, I mean, like I often show the if you Google today, if you Google what is the salinity of the Salton Sea, this is example I use a lot. You'll get a pH number, giant number on Google, 0.8. No, like that's from a study from 1999. Like, but because Google showed you, does that mean that that's right? Like, I mean, who knows who would just grab that data and go use it? Like, there's a real issue with search, right? So I totally take your point, Glenn. Look forward to working on the problem.
Great questions. And we have another question from Caitlin. Looks like Caitlin is still here. Caitlin, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, hi everyone. I just want to say thank you so much for putting this on. This is has been such an incredible presentation and so many great questions. So I love this. So thank you to everyone, and especially you, Peter, for the presentation. So yeah, I work kind of more on the data storage side of things, and I just, in a lot of these different webinars and things that I'm a part of, there's not really a lot of conversation around data storage. And obviously, as someone who works in data storage, that's something that I'm super interested in. So yeah, I'm just wondering if you could speak maybe a little bit more to that. I know when you were talking about the Internet of Water principles and talking about, you know, like who holds the data and those distributed systems, that's something I'm very interested in. So I was just wondering if you could speak more a little bit about that.
Yeah, great question, Caitlin. I really do love you Californians. You always have hard questions. Yeah, distributed storage, right? So there's no, I don't have an answer to this question right now. What I'll say is that because we're just pointing, like the storage is at the level of the producer or the hub, right? Okay, but there are new and modern ways to do that, which you're probably working on, Caitlin. And I'd love to learn more about that, because what we would like to do is offer up best practices around data storage. And data storage in some ways is getting easier because of sort of the, you know, the big picture around that, which is that data is sort of more and more easily compressed and so forth. But anyway, the bottom line is that this is an interesting space that I don't actually know very much about, but I do know is a challenge for those who are actually producing and aggregating data, and we should develop best practices around that, and we should share those best practices.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to connect more with you, because I think some of the work that is going on with GeoConnects kind of relates to some of the work that we're doing, especially with like the persistent identifiers is very similar to something we have with content identification. So yeah, I'd love to connect more on that.
Well, I'd love to have you talk with my technical team. It'd be really interesting conversation.
Yeah, amazing.
Okay, cool. Let me get in touch. It'd be great.
Yes.
All right.
I see that Jake Pasner has another comment in the chat on the National Secure Data Service pilot project. Jake, did you want to talk about that?
Me by any chance?
Yeah, I could mention it. It was mostly a response to somebody asking about ability to share personally identifiable information. So this is actually a bill that I worked on, and it is very hard fought to try and get funding for sharing information, especially private information, within the government. This is a huge topic of discussion. It's got 60, 70 years of stories. The Privacy Act, attempts at national data services, failed, crash burned pieces of legislation, the sausage making Peter was talking about earlier. So this is just a project to flag for people that are trying to think about what technologies exist for overcoming these types of issues. Social scientists are very interested in these things because specifically they deal with a lot of, you know, very sensitive information, and it would be useful if they could share it. So it's the kind of thing that there might be applicable places for this to use. One of the places that I've heard about or seen is specifically sharing between sovereign peoples, tribes, and governments, because they want to be able to maintain custody of their data, but still want to be able to integrate their data with the other resources around them. So there are these technological solutions to social barriers. They just have to find the right place for the implementation at the right time, kind of like how Bitcoin found the blockchain and it was like a match made in heaven suddenly. So mostly just to point it out as a resource to people. There's a lot of, there's committees that have produced reports about these privacy enhancing technologies and investigated them. So maybe just kind of pointing people in the direction of something to look at, and also a pot of money that was just established to try and overcome some of these issues.
That's
Awesome.
thanks,
Go
Jake.
ahead. Yeah.
That we always get that question. It's adjacent to our work, and so, and that solution is really, I think, promising.
Yeah, and that's where hearing all of these different elements and how they potentially come together is so useful. I see Nick has another question on GeoConnects and its licensing agreement and how you're thinking about that. Nick, do you want to jump in? And
Sorry, yeah, it took me a moment to find my camera button. Yeah, I was just curious if GeoConnects, if you have any plans for parts of it to be open source, and if you figured out licensing for contributions, if you have.
Mercifully, GeoConnects is 100% open source from the beginning. The US Geological Survey made that a requirement, and we wanted it that way anyway. So this is a tool we are creating for society. We are not attempting to sell it, and there's just no value in that. We are co-creating a public good with the US Geological Survey. And our hope is that it will be available to everyone, that people contribute to the code, can see the code, and that there will be the lowest possible barrier to participating in the system.
Great, thank you.
so awesome to hear that. Very
Yeah.
exciting. Peter, I have a question. You touched on some work that's going on. I think it was through Duke University on behavior change.
Yeah. Mhm.
That's been flagged a couple of different times. Can you talk a little bit about that, what that looks like, what your sort of vision for that work might be?
Yeah, and this is a great conversation, Tara, if you come to Boston to talk with Dr. Ashley Ward about. So it's Ashley Ward, who was she was the engagement, outreach and engagement senior policy associate at the Internet of Water startup. And she is doing this research and work on technology adoption. And she's actually working in New Mexico as kind of our test case, where we're testing out what we think of as a two-phase process, where the first phase is a set of steps that we take you through to clear some hurdles that are social and behavioral. And then once you've taken those steps, then we'll talk about technology. And I think that is a deep insight of Ashley's, and I think it's worth identifying and promoting this kind of two-phase process where and in much of the same way, Tara, that the creation of the California Water Data Consortium effectively followed that model without knowing it, or maybe not knowing it was going through such a process, but basically the incentives and the kind of nature of things in California led to the very long deliberate process for building the organizational steps, and then now you're doing the actual technical work. And so there was this, I think you guys in a way are sort of a model, but in this case, this goes down a little deeper and is designed to help people within an agency take the behavioral change step. And that is, I think, the key thing inside of a public agency that is so challenging. And so I'm grateful for this research that Ashley's doing, and we'll see she hasn't published the paper yet, so we'll see what comes out of it.
That's awesome. It's really exciting to see. Yeah, I'd love to chat with her more about it. So
yeah.
I have a question for you, Peter, just on the structure of the coalition and the steering committee, the coalition members. I was also reading, and it might have been your presentation, that the coalition is going to have public agency liaisons.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could talk to what what these liaisons kind of look like. Are they going to be at all government levels, from like local, state to federal, and to Kamyar and Tara's points? Are they social scientists? Are they behavioral scientists? So what do you see the role of those public agency liaisons and how they'll be functioning in the coalition?
Yeah, so the public agency liaisons. So fundamentally, the Internet of Water is a multi-sector activity. It is an activity of the philanthropic sector, the public sector, the nonprofit sector, and the private sector, and maybe academic sector if we want to add them as a fifth. So if you break apart philanthropy from nonprofit, you have 5 sectors. I need all 5 sectors to make this work. It will not work without any one of the sectors. So the purpose of the liaisons is to act, just sort of as the word indicates, as a liaison to that sector. Now they speak, so for example, we already have a California public agency rep, Greg Gearhart. But that person will not be, not always, so in Greg's case, he's a technologist, but they don't have to be a technologist. So although we have technologists in the system, so we will have representation from EPA and USGS, from California, Texas, and New Mexico, public agencies, and then the Buffalo Water and Sewer Authority, so a municipal. So we have 1 municipal, 3 states, and 2 feds. That's the kind of configuration of liaisons. And again, and then we have Tony Willardson, who represents a regional state entity. So that he's a public sector person in a regional Western States Water Council, which is a regional forum. So that is the purpose of the public agency liaisons, is to liaise to the sector and to bring insights. They don't speak for their agency in this context. I'm letting them all off the hook in that regard, because it would be almost impossible for the thing to function if this is not a state forum. It's not a forum. This is not the Internet Water Coalition is in no way an intergovernmental forum. Like, it is not that. It is not legal. It has no binding, the liaisons come as liaisons, as the individual experts. But yes, for example, let's say Metropolitan Water wanted to be in a coalition. We could maybe talk about that, right? Like, see if you guys wanted to have a representative. That'd be fine from my perspective. To have another city would be great. A big city would be great. The size of the coalition is small, envisioned as small at the moment, because I think it would be hard to have this conversation with a cast of thousands as we begin. So what we've kind of drawn a circle around a group of 20 to 25, if we're still completing, and then we intend to carry the work forward and then broaden the circle. So that's the hope, but that's the function. I hope I answered your question properly, Erin.
Yes, thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
That was awesome. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Peter for being here today and being so generous with his time, and for facilitating what ultimately has been a really productive conversation. Are there any outstanding questions? Anyone else who has a question that they want to ask? Seeing lots of clapping, yeah. Excellent. Okay, well, with that, I think we will wrap up today's Data for Lunch. Again, huge thank you to you, Peter. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all of you for such active participation and for all the great questions. So,
thank you so much, Tara, and Amanda for all the organization, and Lindsay for the introduction. You guys are wonderful. I love these conversations in California. They're so rich, and I really applaud you for your work, all of you. Please keep doing it. Kamyar, always, Chris, great to see you guys. And I'll see you guys next time.